The stars were quiet that night, or at least that's how the human crew described it. Out beyond the scattered glow of familiar constellations, deep in the endless black of space, there was a silence that seemed eternal. No whispers of radio chatter, no faint echoes of distant civilizations. Just the steady pulse of humanity's first true warship cutting through the void, its hull gleaming like a blade waiting to be tested. The vessel was not the largest thing ever built, nor the most beautiful, but it carried something far heavier than steel and plasma. It carried the weight of a species that had clawed its way out of gravity's grip and declared, for the first time, that it would not bend to anything it could not understand. For centuries, humans had wondered what that first meeting with alien life would feel like. Would it be peace? Would it be friendship? An embrace across the stars? Or would it be fear, mistrust, maybe even war? On this night, those questions no longer lived in theory. They had become real, and the crew of the warship knew that every action they took, every choice they made, might write the opening chapter of humanity's place in the wider galaxy. The aliens did not come with flashing lights or soothing messages. They came with silence, vast ships, strange in design, built with angles that bent the eye and shimmered against starlight as if reality itself was folding around them. No broadcasts, no symbols, no gestures of peace. Just their presence, waiting, watching. Their first contact was not a handshake. It was a stare, an unblinking one that stretched across the gulf of space until the air inside the human ship felt tight and heavy, as though the very stars were holding their breath. Inside the command deck, every console was alive with nervous energy. Radar pings, power readings, whispered conversations cut short by the hum of machines. The crew didn't know what to call the visitors. They weren't enemies, not yet. They weren't allies either. But something about the stillness of those alien ships, so close, so silent, gnawed at the instincts buried deep inside the human mind. Instincts that had been forged when early humans stared across firelit plains and wondered what moved in the dark beyond their reach. The captain didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His words carried in the hush. "They're waiting for us." And in that simple sentence lay the truth no one wanted to admit. For all the advancements, for all the brilliant engines, and weapons humming beneath the floor, humanity still stood as the new ones here, the uninvited guests. The child stepping into a world older than it could ever imagine. The silence stretched on, seconds turned into minutes, and minutes into something heavier. The crew expected sound, some declaration, a word in a language too strange to comprehend, even a pulse of light. Anything. But instead, the aliens simply hovered there, their vessels locked in eerie formation, as if judging, as if weighing. It was not the roar of cannons or the sweep of armadas that unnerved the humans. It was this terrible, unbroken quiet. And yet, behind the unease, something else stirred. A realization. The aliens had expected something different. Perhaps they thought the humans would send a shuttle or a fragile outpost. Perhaps they expected a probe, curious but harmless. They had not expected a warship, armored, bristling, unmistakably built for battle. The humans had come ready not for surrender, but for survival. That fact alone had frozen the stars into stillness. No one spoke it aloud, but every soul aboard the human vessel understood what was happening. In this first meeting, without a word exchanged, something fundamental had shifted. The aliens had met humanity's hand, and instead of open palm, they found a clenched fist, not raised in aggression, but in defiance, a signal that humanity was not here to beg, nor to kneel. For the first time since leaving Earth, the crew felt the weight of what they represented. Billions of lives, thousands of years of history, every struggle, every triumph, every story of survival that had carried them out into the stars. The aliens had come searching for something, weakness perhaps, or submission. Instead, they found a ship built for war, its cannons quiet but ready, its engines burning steady as a heartbeat. But silence cannot last forever. Somewhere out there, in the stillness between stars, a decision was being made, not by the humans, but by those who had found them. A decision that could ignite the galaxy or open doors no one had ever dared to dream of. The crew waited, every second stretching thinner, every breath a question. Would the first sound be a word or a weapon? And then, just as the silence grew unbearable, the alien ships shifted ever so slightly. Not enough to be called an attack, not enough to be called retreat. Just a movement, subtle and deliberate, like the drawing of a breath before speech. The humans braced, eyes fixed on the void, hearts pounding with the knowledge that whatever came next would echo through history forever. The universe itself seemed to lean in, listening. And then, the silence deepened. The aliens did not fire. They did not speak. But the very way they lingered there, caught in the gravity of humanity's warship, told a story in itself. For the first time, they had seen a species rise into the stars with teeth bared, and for the first time, they hesitated. The crew sat frozen at their stations, waiting for the choice that was no longer theirs to make. Would this be the dawn of understanding or the spark of war? The answer hung in the silence, heavy and unspoken, as the alien fleet held its breath and the human warship stood unflinching in the dark. The story of first contact was only beginning. The silence pressed against the walls of the human warship like an invisible weight. Every crew member felt it, a presence that couldn't be measured by sensors or charts, but was somehow more real than the ship's humming engines. The alien vessels still hung outside the viewport, their strange geometries catching starlight in ways the human eye struggled to follow. It was as though they existed halfway between solid and shadow, as if the universe had bent to shape them. The crew waited, hands hovering near controls, voices caught in their throats. Nothing moved. Nothing dared. Beneath the tension, a thought gnawed at them all. Why hadn't the aliens left? They had seen the warship, seen what humanity had built, what they had brought into the dark, and yet they lingered, silent and unyielding. That patience, that refusal to act, unnerved the humans more than 1,000 hostile fleets ever could. To face an enemy was one thing, to face an enigma was another. In the quiet, memories surfaced unbidden. Earth felt impossibly far away, its blue oceans and green hills now nothing but a fragile dream. Many of the crew had volunteered for this mission not out of duty alone, but because of curiosity, pride, and the belief that humanity's place was no longer bound to its home world. They had trained for combat, for exploration, for the unknown. But nothing had prepared them for this kind of stillness. It wasn't the emptiness of space. It was the silence of being seen, judged, and measured by something far older, far stranger. The warship itself was a marvel, a symbol of humanity's resilience. Built after centuries of trial, conflict, and innovation, it was not designed to start wars, but to ensure survival if war came. Its hull was forged from alloys that could shrug off the bite of meteors. Its engines could cross the void faster than any human craft before it. And its weapons, though never fired in true anger, were designed with grim precision. The crew did not speak of them as tools of destruction. They called them shields, guardians of a people who had always known how fragile survival could be. The aliens' silence forced the crew to look inward. Each officer carried their own fears, their own doubts. Some wondered if the warship's very presence had doomed first contact. Others believed it was the only reason they were still alive. In their hearts, they wrestled with questions that had no answers. Did the aliens understand what a warship meant? Did they see it as aggression, or as proof that humanity refused to crawl into the stars unarmed? And most unsettling of all, did The aliens already know more about humans than humans knew about themselves? Time stretched. Hours passed, or maybe only minutes. The mind lost track when every heartbeat echoed like thunder. The crew had begun to notice strange readings on their instruments. Flickers of energy. Ripples in the void, like the aftershocks of distant storms. The alien ships emitted no clear signal, no obvious transmission, yet the sensors whispered of patterns too precise to be random. The ship's scientists murmured that it might be communication, some form of exchange beyond human comprehension. But if it was, the message was not meant for human ears. The captain ordered patience, though his own knuckles were white against the armrest of his chair. "We do not fire," he reminded them. "We do not move unless we must. The first mistake cannot be ours." His voice was steady, but inside, every person aboard knew what he feared. One slip, one misstep, and history's first meeting between species could ignite into disaster. The aliens' silence was not total. Small shifts betrayed them, tiny movements of their vessels, like drifting shadows circling a flame. It was clear they were studying the warship, perhaps dissecting its every detail. The crew imagined alien minds peering into their hull, cataloging weapons, measuring life signs, weighing humanity's strength against some unknowable scale. Were they impressed or disappointed? No one could tell. The human crew had trained for many scenarios, but none for this. In their training halls, instructors had spoken of diplomacy, of emergency protocols, of hostile engagements. But no one had spoken of being stared at in silence by something beyond reason. The unknown gnawed at them. Every whisper of thought became a seed of paranoia. What if the aliens weren't silent at all? What if their communication was flooding the void even now, only invisible to human senses? What if, in some alien council, humanity's fate was already sealed? Sleep became difficult. Even off-duty officers lay in their bunks with eyes open, listening to the warship's engines hum, wondering if the next sound they heard would be the thunder of weapons or the crackle of alien voices. Some whispered about their families on Earth, about the messages they hoped they had sent before leaving. Others clung to the idea that this was still an opportunity, that silence, though heavy, was better than bloodshed. The human spirit, stubborn as ever, refused to give in to despair. Still, unease grew. The ship's logs filled with small anomalies, sensors glitching, unexplained fluctuations in power, faint echoes across communication bands. The engineers swore the systems were sound, yet the patterns kept returning. Some crew members believed the aliens were probing them, testing their defenses. Others thought the warship itself was reacting to the tension, machines groaning under a pressure no blueprint had prepared for, and through it all, the aliens lingered, watching, waiting, not attacking, not retreating, just there. The longer they waited, the more the crew began to question what silence really meant. Perhaps it was not hesitation but confidence. Perhaps the aliens had nothing to fear from a single human warship, no matter how advanced. Perhaps they were simply amused, letting humanity squirm under their gaze. That thought was more frightening than any weapon. The captain gathered his senior officers, their faces pale in the glow of the command deck. "We are not prey," he told them. "We are not children lost in the dark. Whatever they see when they look at us, they must know we stand ready, not eager for war, not begging for peace, but ready." His words carried weight, but even he could not deny the gnawing truth. Readiness was not control. They were still reacting, not deciding, still waiting, not acting, and so the hours stretched, turning into a vigil unlike any other. The alien ships remained silent, their strange forms blotting out starlight like unblinking eyes. The warship stood firm, its crew bound together by fear and defiance. Every person aboard knew they were part of something larger than themselves. Every second that passed carved their place into history, even if no one back on Earth ever learned what had truly happened here. What unsettled them most was not the thought of battle. It was the thought that maybe this was not a meeting at all. Maybe the aliens had not come to speak or to fight, but to judge. Maybe they had already decided humanity's fate, and the silence was not waiting. It was the verdict. And yet, still, they lingered. No weapons fired, no words spoken, only the endless pressure of being seen, of standing on the edge of something vast and unknowable. The human warship endured, engines steady, weapons silent, crew alert. But deep within, each soul wondered the same thing. How long could silence last before it broke? The answer, they knew, would change everything. The warship drifted through the void, caught between silence and the weight of expectation. The alien. Vessels still loomed beyond the viewport, unblinking and unchanging, and yet their presence seemed to grow heavier with every passing hour. The crew could not escape the feeling that they were trapped in a contest they barely understood, a game of patience where the first move might decide the fate of their species. What unsettled them most was that the aliens seemed to play with an ease that humans could not match. To them, silence was effortless. To the humans, it was suffocating. The captain remained outwardly calm, but even he was not immune to the strain. His eyes often lingered on the tactical displays, the weapon status indicators glowing faintly along the console. He never gave the order to ready them beyond standard protocols, but everyone knew he thought about it. The possibility was there, hanging in the air like static before a storm. The crew avoided saying the word battle, but it lived in the silence, tucked into the corners of every glance and whispered conversation. Below the command deck, the engineers worked tirelessly, checking and rechecking every system. They swore the ship was sound, but the unexplained fluctuations continued. Power dips too brief to trigger alarms, yet sharp enough to notice. Flickers in communication bands, faint and ghostly. Some began to suspect the aliens were not just watching, but touching the ship in subtle ways, probing its defenses, feeling out its limits. The chief engineer, tired and irritable, argued that it might all be coincidence, artifacts of pushing, a vessel into the far reaches of deep space. But few believed him. Coincidence did not repeat itself so cleanly. In the science wing, the specialists huddled over data streams, tracing patterns through the static. They whispered about rhythms, shapes in the noise that looked like signals but never held steady, long enough to confirm. One insisted it was a form of communication, but layered so deeply that human instruments could only catch fragments. Another suggested it was deliberate interference, a way of showing dominance without firing a shot. The scientists disagreed with one another, but they agreed on one thing. The aliens were not idle. Silence, in this case, was not absence. It was action in disguise. Among the crew, the strain bred restlessness. In the mess hall, conversations turned sour, looping endlessly back to the same questions. Why had they come? What did the aliens want? And why did they refuse to speak? One officer, younger than most, muttered that maybe the aliens saw humanity as beneath notice, like insects wandering into their territory. Others snapped back that if that were true, the warship would already be nothing but drifting wreckage. The arguments never resolved, but they revealed the raw edges of fear creeping into every heart. The captain ordered small routines to keep discipline strong, rotations, drills, maintenance checks, tasks that gave the crew something to hold on to when the silence grew unbearable. But even these routines began to feel hollow. Drills prepared them for attacks that never came. Maintenance polished systems already flawless. Each completed task only reminded them that they were still waiting, still powerless, still caught in the gaze of something beyond their control. At night, though night was meaningless in deep space, some crew members claimed to dream of the alien vessels. Shapes shifting in the dark, pressing against the glass of the viewport, whispers in languages they could not understand. They woke sweating, their hearts racing, unsure if the dreams belonged to their own minds or were somehow planted there. They told themselves it was stress, but the thought lingered that maybe the alien silence was not silence at all. Maybe it was intrusion. Whispers of paranoia began to spread. A technician swore his console had flickered with symbols he didn't recognize before returning to normal. A navigator claimed the stars outside shifted, subtly, impossibly, like the alien ships were bending, reality itself. An officer said she heard a voice through her headset, faint and inhuman, though the channels had been empty. The captain dismissed these reports as stress, yet he kept them logged. Patterns, even in fear, could not be ignored. Despite the tension, a strange unity held the crew together. Fear made them sharp, made them cling to one another. They knew. They stood not as individuals, but as the face of their species. Each one carried that burden, whether in silence or whispered prayers. Even the smallest action felt monumental, as though unseen eyes weighed every breath. Humanity, for all its flaws and divisions, was bound here by the knowledge that this encounter would be remembered, if they survived to tell it. The conflict was no longer just between human and alien. It was within the crew itself. The longer the silence stretched, the more divided their thoughts became. Some pushed for action, a signal, a gesture, anything to break the stalemate. Others argued that to act would be to fall into a trap, to reveal weakness or impatience. Every option felt dangerous, and yet doing nothing felt worse. Tension rose like a storm cloud with no release. The ship's sensors finally detected something undeniable. A pulse of energy, faint but deliberate, radiating from the alien formation. It was not a weapons charge, not an attack, but it was too controlled to be natural. The scientists scrambled to interpret it, their voices overlapping, in hurried debate. Some called it a greeting, others a warning. The tactical officers treated it as a test, proof that the aliens could reach out whenever they wished. The captain ordered restraint. "We watch, we wait. They have not fired." His words calmed no one. Meanwhile, life aboard the ship grew heavier. Meals were quieter. Laughter vanished. Even the hum of the engines seemed different, more urgent, as though the ship itself knew what hung over them. The youngest crew members clung to duty like armor, their hands steady even when their eyes betrayed fear. The veterans wore masks, of calm, but when they thought no one was watching, their stares drifted toward the viewport, filled with unease. And through it all, the aliens remained silent. Their ships shifted occasionally, just enough to remind the humans they were still there, still watching. The energy pulses came irregularly, never predictable, each one sparking new theories and new fears. Were the aliens trying to speak, or simply reminding the humans of their power? The question gnawed at everyone. Subplots began to unfold in the shadows of the main conflict. One of the scientists, desperate to understand, began running unauthorized experiments, bouncing signals into the void in hopes of a response. When the captain discovered it, he stopped her with sharp words, but the damage was done. For all they knew, the aliens had already noticed. Trust wavered, not just between human and alien, but between crewmates themselves. In another corner of the ship, the navigator grew convinced that the stars were shifting subtly around them, as though the Warship was no longer where it had once been. He kept quiet at first, fearing ridicule, but soon confided in a colleague. That whisper spread, adding a new thread of fear. What if the aliens were not just observing but moving them, nudging the warship through space without their knowledge? The thought was madness, but in the grip of silence, madness did not seem impossible. The conflict deepened into layers. It was not just a standoff of ships, but of wills. Humanity's need to act clashed with its need to survive. The crew's loyalty to one another strained under fear and doubt. The aliens' silence became more than absence. It became a force, pressing against every mind, reshaping thoughts in ways no one could quite resist, and still the warship endured. Its engines hummed, its weapons stayed silent, its crew held fast. But with every passing moment, the question grew sharper, heavier. How long could a species defined by action, by survival, by defiance, endure being trapped in silence? And when that silence finally broke, what truth would it reveal? The crew waited, breathless, knowing that the answer might not be mercy, nor understanding, but something far stranger. The void held its secrets close, and the warship pressed on, steady in the dark, carrying the weight of all humanity as the alien eyes never blinked. The alien fleet did not leave. Their vessels remained locked in eerie formation, their strange angles still bending the starlight as though the void itself bent to their will. Hours had become days, yet the silence never cracked. What had begun as tension now burned into something sharper, something that lived in every heartbeat of the crew. It was no longer a question of patience. It was a question of endurance. How long could human beings, fragile and finite, stand beneath the unbroken gaze of the unknown? The captain had stopped sleeping. His voice was steady, his orders measured, but his eyes betrayed him. They had grown darker, sharper, filled with a weight that pressed deeper each passing hour. He walked the command deck with slow precision, checking every console, speaking to every officer, reminding them without words that he was still there, that he would not falter first. But behind the facade, he carried a burden none of them could share, the knowledge that the fate of Earth might hang on choices he had not yet been forced to make. The energy pulses from the alien ships continued, irregular and unpredictable. Sometimes hours passed between them, sometimes only minutes. Each one rippled through the sensors, too controlled to be random, too deliberate to be dismissed. The science teams worked tirelessly, dissecting the patterns, tracing rhythms, trying to crack a code that never stayed still long enough to reveal itself. One moment they swore it was language, the next they argued it was intimidation. The theories changed, but the fear did not. Every pulse was a reminder. The aliens could reach them whenever they wished. Among the crew, unity began to fray. In the mess hall, hushed arguments broke out. Some demanded action, that they send a clear signal, make their presence undeniable, prove that humans would not sit quietly under scrutiny. Others begged for patience, insisting that any move could be misread as aggression. Even friendships strained under the weight of these choices. Whispers turned into sharp words, and sharp words into silence. The warship remained whole, but cracks had begun to show within. One night, or what passed for night in the endless dark, the ship shuddered. Not from weapons fire, not from engines, but from something no one could explain. The lights dimmed for only a second, yet in that second, every console blinked with impossible symbols, patterns that vanished as quickly as they came. Alarms stayed silent, but the fear was louder than any siren. Some swore they had felt something move inside their minds in that instant, a pressure, a shadow, a presence that vanished before they could name it. When the systems returned to normal, no one could agree on what had happened, but no one could dismiss it either. The captain addressed the crew soon after, his voice carried across every deck. He reminded them that humanity had faced the unknown before, oceans uncharted, skies untraveled, worlds unexplored. He spoke of endurance, of defiance, of survival. His words steadied them, but they could not erase the memory of that flicker. For the first time, the silence had reached inside the warship. The boundary between observation and intrusion had blurred. From then on, the crew felt the aliens not just outside, but within. Sleep came harder. Dreams grew stranger. Some swore they heard whispers in the static of the comms, faint voices that vanished the moment they tried to focus. Others claimed to see shapes flicker at the edges of the viewport, shadows that twisted and disappeared when stared at directly. The line between reality and imagination thinned, and no one could tell if the aliens were pressing harder or if the humans were simply unraveling under the weight of waiting. The navigator became convinced the ship was no longer where it had been. He showed the captain charts, insisting the constellations had shifted ever so slightly, like they were being pulled without moving. The captain listened, studied the data, and said nothing. But in the silence afterward, the navigator whispered to others, and soon the idea spread that the warship was being moved like a piece on a board, guided by a hand they could not see. Tension mounted further when the unauthorized experiments came to light. A scientist, desperate for answers, had sent coded bursts into the void without clearance. The aliens did not respond, or if they did, the response was unreadable. When the captain found out, his anger shook the command deck. The scientist was confined to quarters, but the damage had been done. Now the crew lived with the knowledge that their silence had already been broken, not by the aliens, but by one of their own. Fear twisted into suspicion. Who else might act out of desperation? Who else might risk everything for answers? Then came the moment no one could ignore. The alien fleet shifted in unison, breaking their perfect stillness for the first time. The vessels moved not closer, not farther, but into a new formation, one that mirrored the shape of the human warship exactly. Sensors confirmed it. Dozens of alien ships aligning into a pattern that reflected humanity's lone vessel, as though they were holding up a mirror in the dark. The sight stole the breath from every crew member who saw it. The meaning was unclear, but the intent was undeniable. It was not random. It was a message. The warship's crew argued endlessly over what it meant. Some said it was mimicry, a sign of understanding, an attempt at communication. Others saw it as mockery, a way of showing that the aliens could replicate humanity's strength effortlessly. The captain gave no interpretation aloud. He simply ordered every station to remain alert. For though the aliens had not fired, the gesture carried weight more powerful than any weapon. It told the humans one simple, terrifying truth. They were not just being watched, they were being studied. Every moment after that felt heavier. The air inside the ship seemed to thicken. Conversations grew shorter, glances sharper. The crew moved like people standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing the ground beneath them could give way at any second. The energy pulses continued. Now, timed with the new formation, echoing in rhythm with the ship's own heartbeat. The synchronization was undeniable, as though the aliens had tuned themselves to humanity's presence. Fear gave way to something deeper, anticipation. The crew no longer asked if something would happen, but when. The waiting had become unbearable, stretched to the breaking point. Each officer, each technician, each soldier aboard knew they were moving toward something inevitable. Something that could no longer be delayed. The captain stood alone at the viewport, his reflection pale against the stars. He watched the alien fleet mirror his ship, their silence more powerful than 1,000 guns. His crew waited for his order, for his decision, for some sign of what came next. But even he could not pierce the meaning of the void. All he could do was hold fast, steady in the face of silence that pressed harder than any storm. And then, as if the universe itself had chosen the moment, the sensors lit up. A surge of energy, vast and undeniable, rippled across the void. It dwarfed every previous pulse, its wave shaking the warship to its core. Consoles blared, alarms screamed, and the crew snapped to stations with wide eyes and pounding hearts. The alien fleet had broken their stillness, and the silence was no longer silence at all. The warship braced, every soul aboard knowing the climax had begun. The questions that haunted them, friend or foe, peace or war, survival or extinction, were about to be answered. And yet the truth had not arrived. Not yet. The void held its breath once more. The humans did the same, and in that razor-thin pause before the universe spoke, the crew felt the full weight of history pressing down upon them. Whatever came next, there would be no turning back. The alarms still echoed through the corridors of the warship, their shrill cry merging with the pounding of human hearts. The energy surge had rippled across the void like the beat of some colossal drum, shaking the vessel's hull and searing the consoles with waves of unreadable data. The alien fleet, once silent and unmoving, had finally acted, but not with weapons, not with words. The crew stared at their screens, breath held, waiting for the next strike, the next sound, the next sign. And then, just as suddenly as it began, the surge vanished. The void fell quiet again, but it was no longer the same silence as before. Something had shifted. Something had begun. The scientists scrambled to interpret the readings. The surge had carried more power than anything they had recorded, vast enough to cripple entire fleets if focused into a weapon. Yet no damage had been done. Shields held. Engines thrummed steady. Life support was untouched. The energy had passed through them, like a wave through the ocean, leaving no scar but the memory of its strength. To some, it seemed like a warning. To others, a demonstration. But to the captain, the most frightening possibility was that it had been a test. The crew braced for the next pulse, but it never came. Instead, something stranger happened. The alien fleet began to split apart. Not retreating, not advancing, but rearranging into patterns more complex than before. They wove across the void like dancers, their ships shifting in deliberate arcs, crossing and reforming in a choreography so precise it made the human vessel seem clumsy in comparison. Their movement was not random. It was intentional, elegant, almost ritualistic. The human crew could only watch, spellbound and afraid, as the aliens painted geometry into the stars. Then came the true shock. The warship's instruments flickered and died for a heartbeat, and in that instant, every screen aboard the ship lit up with a single image. It was not of the aliens, not of their ships. It was Earth. The blue-green sphere hung against the black, sharp and vivid, spinning slowly on the monitors. Oceans, continents, clouds curling in familiar swirls, home. The crew stared in silence, some with tears welling in their eyes, others with fists tightening at their sides. There was no mistaking it. The aliens had shown them their world. The image lasted only seconds before vanishing, replaced once again by the silent void. But the meaning was undeniable. The aliens not only knew of Earth, they had the power to reach into human systems and project it at will. For the first time, the crew felt not just fear, but exposure. Their home was no longer hidden. Their families, their cities, their entire species had been laid bare before something they could not understand. The shock turned quickly into conflict among the crew. Some believed it was a gesture of recognition, proof that the aliens sought dialogue. Others argued it was a threat, a reminder that humanity's heart lay vulnerable across the stars. The captain listened, silent, his jaw tight. He knew they could not afford to interpret wrongly, yet he also knew they had no choice but to interpret. The aliens had given them no words, no guide, only silence, and now this. As the debate simmered, the navigator made a discovery that chilled the entire ship. Their position in space had changed. Subtly, impossibly, the warship was no longer where it had been. The stars had shifted not by degrees but by distances that should have required faster-than-light travel. Yet the engines had never fired. No course correction had been logged. The warship had been moved, displaced, without its crew's consent or awareness. And worse still, the new position was closer to the alien fleet than before. Fear spread like wildfire. The crew realized they were not just being watched, they were being controlled. The warship was no longer entirely their own. For all its power, for all its weapons and armor, it was a vessel caught in the grasp of something far greater. The sense of defiance that had carried them until now faltered, replaced with the dawning awareness that they might already be prisoners in all but name. The captain called for calm, but the strain in his voice betrayed him. He ordered the systems checked, weapons primed, shields reinforced. Every officer obeyed, but none could shake the truth. If the aliens had moved them once, they could move them again. The warship's strength was meaningless if it could be plucked from space like a leaf on the wind. Then came the second twist, sharper than the first. The alien fleet's formation shifted once more, but this time their vessels arranged themselves into a shape that no human could mistake. It was not abstract geometry, not ritualistic dance. It was the unmistakable outline of the warship itself, copied, mirrored, multiplied 100-fold in the dark. Alien vessels imitating the human vessel, their angles bending to replicate every contour, every line. The void filled with reflections of humanity's most powerful creation, forged not by human hands, but by something far older. The crew's breath caught as the truth sank in. The aliens were not just studying them, they were replicating them. Humanity's greatest symbol of survival, of strength, of defiance, had been duplicated with ease. What had taken generations of struggle, sacrifice, and innovation, the aliens had mirrored in minutes. The warship was no longer unique. It was no longer theirs alone. Panic threatened to boil over. Some officers shouted for immediate retreat. Others demanded they fire before it was too late. The science teams argued frantically, their voices breaking, trying to make sense of the impossible. But the captain held his ground, his voice cutting through the chaos. We do not fire unless they fire. We do not move unless we must. Remember what we stand for. Remember who we are. His words steadied them, but only barely. The fear remained, sharp and cutting. Outside, the alien fleet held their mirrored formation, their silence more deafening than ever. The human warship floated in the midst of its own reflection, surrounded by copies of itself created by hands it could not see, minds it could not fathom. It was not just a test now. It was a challenge, a demonstration, a declaration. The stakes had risen beyond survival. This was no longer about whether humanity would live or die in this encounter. It was about what humanity was, and whether that identity would endure when faced with something that could erase its uniqueness with a gesture. The crew felt it deep in their bones. They were standing at the edge of something greater than war. Something that could unmake them without a single shot fired. And yet the silence stretched on. The aliens did not speak. The aliens did not fire. They only watched, only mirrored, only pressed their presence deeper into the minds and hearts of the crew. The warship's people waited, their breath tight, their hands trembling over controls, their thoughts spiraling with fear and wonder. They knew the climax was near, but the resolution had not yet come. The void remained unbroken. The silence deepened once more. And in that unbearable stillness, the humans understood the truth. The aliens had not shown them everything yet. The worst was still to come. The mirrored fleet surrounded the human warship like a cage of shadows. The alien vessels had reshaped themselves into perfect copies of humanity's greatest weapon, and the crew could feel the weight of that imitation pressing down on them. Their own reflection stared back at them, multiplied across the stars, until it was impossible to tell where the real ship ended and the alien silhouettes began. The silence had grown unbearable, and the crew braced for the moment when it would finally shatter. Then, without warning, the alien reflections moved. They surged forward in perfect unison, drawing closer to the human ship with a speed that made the crew's breath catch. Alarms screamed again, sensors lit up in waves of red, and every hand flew to controls as though instinct could shield them from what was coming. The captain's voice cut through the chaos, sharp and steady. "Hold your ground. Do not fire unless we have no choice." The alien fleet closed in, but instead of striking, they stopped at the edge of weapons range. Their vessels hovered there, their mirrored shapes forming a living wall around the warship. And then, for the first time since the encounter began, a sound filled the command deck. It was not words, not music, not static, but something stranger, an echoing resonance, like the vibration of the universe itself. The sound crawled through the air and rattled inside the bones of the crew. It was not heard with ears alone, but felt deep in the chest, in the pulse of the heart. The scientists scrambled to capture it, but the sound defied their instruments. Every attempt to record it returned nothing but silence. Yet to the crew, it was undeniable. The aliens were finally speaking, though not in any way humanity had ever imagined. The resonance shifted, layered upon itself, building into a rhythm that made patterns flicker on the consoles. Symbols appeared, sharp and angular, shifting faster than the eye could follow. The warship's systems strained under the intrusion, and sparks crackled at a few stations, but the captain ordered no retaliation. He watched, silent, waiting for meaning to emerge, and then it did. The symbols stabilized into something unmistakable. Across every screen, a single image formed once. Again, Earth, the same blue sphere, glowing in the dark, suspended against the void. But this time, there was something else. The planet was encircled by the same mirrored shapes now surrounding the warship. Alien vessels, countless in number, drawn like shadows encasing humanity's home. The message was clear. The aliens had not simply found Earth. They had the power to encircle it, to cage it, to claim it. Fear surged through the crew like a wave. Some shouted for weapons to be armed. Others begged for restraint. The captain stood frozen, his jaw tight, his hand hovering over the command console. He had trained for battle, for diplomacy, for the unknown, but never for this, for a silent threat so vast it defied comprehension. The warship was powerful, yes, but one ship could not stand against what the image promised. Humanity itself could not stand against it. The resonance deepened, the sound pressing harder, filling the ship with vibrations that made teeth ache and hearts race. It was as if the aliens were waiting for an answer. The crew felt the pressure of it, the demand hidden inside the silence. Submit, resist, choose. The captain closed his eyes, just for a moment, and thought of Earth, of oceans and forests, of cities alive with lights, of people who had no idea that their world was now under alien gaze. He thought of the crew, their faces pale with fear but burning with defiance. Humanity had always survived not by surrendering to the unknown, but by meeting it head-on. He opened his eyes, steady once more. "We are not prey," he said. "We answer on our terms." With a gesture, he ordered the warship's lights to flare to full intensity, the engines burning bright as a beacon in the dark. The ship's weapons hummed to life, but not to fire, only to show their presence. Every system on the vessel sang at once, a chorus of human defiance. The crew broadcast a signal into the void, not in words, but in raw strength. Power readings, engine pulses, the rhythm of human technology, steady and proud. It was humanity's declaration. We are here. We will endure. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. The alien fleet remained still, their mirrored shapes glowing faintly in the starlight. The resonance paused, the vibration vanishing so suddenly it left the crew gasping in the silence. And then, the alien vessels began to shift again. Slowly, Deliberately, they broke their mirrored formation. One by one, they peeled away, retreating into the depths of space. The wall around the warship dissolved until only the stars remained. The crew stared in disbelief. The sensors confirmed it. The alien fleet was withdrawing. No shots fired, no words spoken, no final strike. Just silence once more, but this time it carried a different weight. Relief crashed over the crew like a wave, followed by exhaustion so deep it stole their breath. Against all odds, they had survived. But just as they began to believe the encounter was over, the final twist revealed itself. A single alien vessel did not leave. It remained where the fleet had been, its strange geometry shifting slowly, pulsing, with faint light. The sensors flared again, and for a moment the crew thought another surge was coming. But instead, the vessel projected one last image across their screens. Not Earth this time, not the warship, something else. It was a human face. The image was fragmented, incomplete, as though pieced together from countless intercepted transmissions. The features were blurred, the eyes indistinct, the mouth little more than a shadow. But it was unmistakably human. A reflection of their own kind, staring back at them through alien hands. The message struck harder than any threat. The aliens did not just know of Earth. They had been watching humanity for longer than anyone could guess. Watching, recording, learning. The face lingered for a few seconds, then dissolved into static. The alien vessel pulsed once more with light, and then vanished, disappearing into the void without trace. The crew sat in stunned silence, the weight of what they had seen pressing into their bones. The conflict was over, but the meaning was far from clear. The aliens had come not to destroy, not to conquer, but to reveal something deeper. They had mirrored humanity's warship. They had shown Earth. And now they had shown a human face. It was not war they had brought. It was a question. The captain sank into his chair, his hands trembling for the first time. The crew exchanged glances. Fear mingled with awe. They had endured the silence. They had stood their ground. But the final twist left them shaken more than any battle could. The aliens were gone, but the truth remained. Humanity was not alone. It had never been alone. And somewhere, in the vast dark, something had been watching them all along. The warship turned slowly, its engines burning as it set course back toward the stars of home. The crew knew their lives had been forever changed. They had met the silence. They had survived the test. But the image of that human face would follow them, haunting every thought, every step. Because the question was no longer if humanity was ready for first contact. The question was how long humanity had already been living under alien eyes. The warship drifted through the silence of space, the last echoes of the alien encounter fading like ripples on water. The alarms had long since gone quiet, the crew moving with heavy exhaustion through the ship's corridors. But no one spoke in casual tones. No one laughed, and no one pretended the encounter had been anything ordinary. They had faced something, beyond human understanding, something that had mirrored their strength, shown them their own home, and finally revealed the haunting truth with the image of a human face. In the command deck, the captain sat with shoulders bowed, not in defeat, but in reflection. His eyes moved across the stars, and for the first time since the standoff began, the void seemed truly vast again. Yet it no longer felt empty. It felt inhabited, filled with watchers humanity had never known were there. For all the power of the warship, for all the discipline of the crew, the captain knew that in the end, their victory had not come from weapons or technology. It had come from endurance. They had held their ground, they had not broken, and that choice had carried them through. The scientists, though weary, pieced together what little they could from the encounter. The energy surges had been measured, precise, never designed to harm. The mirrored formations and replicated warship had been demonstrations, not attacks, and the final image, the human face, had been constructed from fragments of intercepted signals, broadcasts that had drifted into space for decades. The aliens had been listening, collecting, and waiting. They had known humanity far longer than humanity had known them. This truth rippled through the crew in different ways. Some felt awe, as though they had glimpsed the edge of a greater civilization that had chosen, for reasons unknown, to let them live. Others felt anger, a deep unease that their home had been exposed, their people studied like specimens without consent. But beneath the differences, they all carried the same realization. The story of humanity had changed forever. The navigator, who had feared the ship was being moved like a pawn, now studied the stars with steadier eyes. He confirmed their course back toward familiar constellations, back toward the path of Earth. The warship had been displaced, yes, but not lost. Whatever the aliens had wanted to show, they had not imprisoned humanity's vessel. They had set it free again, as though returning a piece to the board after showing the players who truly held the game. In the mess hall, the arguments that had once filled the air had fallen silent. Crew members sat together, sharing quiet meals, each lost in thought. Some whispered about what they would tell their families, how they would describe the silence that had been louder than any battle. Others admitted they did not know how to explain what they had seen. How could anyone describe the feeling of being measured by something so far beyond human comprehension? The captain addressed the crew one final time before their journey home. His words carried the weight of everything they had endured. He spoke not of victory, nor of defeat, but of survival. "We faced them as humans," he said. "We did not break. We did not kneel, and we did not fire. We endured. That is what we will take back with us. That is what Earth must know." His voice was steady, but softer than before, the hardness giving way to something closer to wonder. The warship's return journey was long, but no longer filled with the suffocating silence of fear. Instead, the silence became something else: reflection, memory, understanding. The crew carried their subplots with them. The scientist who had sent unauthorized signals confessed her actions, and though she faced the captain's reprimand, she also admitted she had done it out of desperation, out of a need to feel less powerless. The navigator, once haunted by shifting stars, grew calmer as the constellations returned to their rightful places. And even those who had quarreled most fiercely found themselves bound by the shared weight of what they had survived. When the warship finally neared Earth space, the sight of home brought a silence of a different kind. The blue planet glowed against the dark, fragile yet resilient, alive with billions who had no idea how close their story had come to changing forever. Some crew members wept openly, others stood straighter, their pride swelling with the knowledge of what they carried back. They had looked into the face of the unknown and endured. The message they brought home was not simple. Humanity was not alone. Humanity had never been alone. The silence of the stars had only been silence to human ears. But beyond it, watchers had been waiting. The aliens had not destroyed them, had not invaded, but they had shown something more profound, that they were aware, that they could act, that they could reach into human systems, human minds, even human identity itself. This revelation shook the crew more than any threat of war. For if humanity's story had been written under alien observation all along, then the question was no longer about readiness for first contact. The question was, what kind of species humanity would choose to become now that it knew the truth? Would they rise, united by defiance and survival, or falter, divided by fear and suspicion? That decision could not be made in a single warship. It would be made across the world. The final twist, the image of the human face, lingered with them all. Some believed it had been a gesture of connection, the aliens showing they understood humanity in its most basic form. Others feared it was a warning, a reminder that their identities, their very likeness, could be mirrored and remade as easily as the warship had been. The meaning would be debated for generations, but its impact could not be denied. Humanity had been seen, known, and remembered. As the warship descended toward orbit, the captain looked once more at the stars. He thought of the silence, of the resonance, of the mirrored shapes that had surrounded his ship. He thought of how close humanity had come to disaster and how close it had come to something greater. His final words to his crew were simple, but they carried the weight of history. "We are not alone, and we never were. Remember that." The crew disembarked, each carrying their own scars and their own pride. Some would speak openly of what they had endured, others would keep it locked, inside. But all of them would forever be marked by the silence, by the reflection, by the face that had stared back at them from alien light. They had gone into the dark expecting war or peace, and instead found something far stranger: recognition. And so the story closed not with cannons firing, not with treaties signed, but with a quiet truth carried back to Earth. Humanity had stepped into the stars ready to defend itself, and in that readiness it had been noticed. The silence of first contact had not been empty. It had been full of meaning, a mirror held to an entire species. The warship returned home, engines cooling, weapons untouched, but forever changed. The stars still stretched above, vast and unknowable, filled with watchers unseen. Humanity would rise again into that void, stronger for what had been learned. And somewhere out there, the silence still waited, ready for the next encounter, the next choice, the next chapter. The journey was over, but the message remained clear. Humanity was no longer a lonely voice in the dark. It had been heard, it had been seen, and the silence of the galaxy would never feel the same again.